Sometimes when we sit down to record the podcast, we got our levels. No, our levels are okay. Sometimes when I sit down to record the podcast and do our live streams here on Tuesday night, sometimes I think that I should, do like a Led Zeppelin or one of these bands that's sort of notoriously late for their scheduled start time. Like I tell you it's going to start at 8:30 and then I don't actually sit down and start recording until like 9:30, 10 o'clock or something like that. I always think it'd be funny to show up late for the podcast and see how many people would actually stick around during the live stream being like, is he going to show up? Where is he? Because we had a few people in the waiting room before the live stream starts. I always wonder if I should I also have what I've considered is doing like an entrance walk. You know what I mean? Like standing behind the computer, clicking the go live button, and then having sort of a grand dramatic entrance and sitting down, really showing up. Maybe have some music or something like that to kick off the live stream. But I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm not going to start late. I'm not going to have some grand entrance. I'm not going to have walk up music or anything like that. Just going to sit down, start our podcast. As always, it's the Panther-Lair Show. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Always glad to be here on a Tuesday night. We made it another week closer to the football season, another week closer to, another week closer to next week, right? Is the way it kind of always goes. You should know that website, though. If you enjoy this podcast or enjoy the live stream, Panther-Lair.com is a website you need to check out, you need to be familiar with. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, there are message boards where all day, every day, and that's not an exaggeration, we're having conversations about Pitt sports, football, basketball, recruiting, whatever else is going on. We have Olympic sports message boards, and basically whatever Pitt fans are talking about, they're talking about it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. You might be talking to your friend about something. You might hear other Pitt fans talk about things. But all those conversations are happening at Panther-Lair.com. And it's just, I think it's the best online community of Pitt fans. I mean, I think if you're a Pitt fan, you're looking for other Pitt fans to talk to online, then you need to find the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I think it's the best place to be. It's the best place to check out if you are a Pitt fan. Of course, if you enjoy this podcast, we appreciate it. Tell a friend, rate and review, do all those things. That's sort of geared, that comment's geared more to the people who listen to the audio podcast, and I think there's still a lot of you out there, and I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody who tunes in on the live stream. If you only listen to the audio version, you can always jump into the live stream Tuesday nights, 8:30, usually for about an hour. 8:30 to 9:30 is what we tend to do, trying to hit that hour mark. Sometimes we have to stretch it to get to an hour. Sometimes we go over an hour. Sometimes we fall a little short. It doesn't really matter. We're not bound by anything other than our own, interest in talking about Pitt, right? But if you listen to the podcast and you hear people asking questions, or you have your own response or reactions or comments or questions or whatever it is, feedback, jump in the live stream. Every Tuesday night, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's the website you can go to. That's the address for our YouTube channel. I think if you go to YouTube and just search Panther-Lair or Panther-Lair, you're probably going to find it. But it's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And we're live every Tuesday night. You can sit there and watch this live stream. You can join the chat, ask your questions, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. Of course, if you're in the live stream and you want to make sure your questions get answered, you make sure your comments and feedback or thoughts, whatever reactions get some kind of response, you can always be a super chatter where you contribute a little bit to the podcast, and we make sure we get to your questions and comments. RJCman38 already jumped in as a super chatter before we even hit the ground running tonight, so we appreciate you for sure, man. And, we appreciate anybody who supports the podcast and supports the live stream. We do this for fun, and we appreciate everybody who jumps in with us here. Not as busy of a week in Pitt sports, still lots of conversation going on. We obviously talked about Tyrese Fearbury committing to Penn State last week. That happened on the 4th of July. And we talked about that on last week's podcast, had some extended discussions about that. That really dominated a lot of the conversation on the message boards for the better part of last week. Move in through this past weekend, Pitt landed another commitment, number 12 for the class of 2022. It's Bradley Mann. a big lineman from Jacksonville, Florida, guy who could project at offensive tackle or defensive end. I think Pitt's primary interest in him, at least at the start, was in him playing offensive tackle, and I think that's where he'll start his career at Pitt for a number of reasons I'll talk about in a second. I think he'll start his career at Pitt, but he could play defensive end in college. 6'6", 255-pound guy, I think. I'll double-check that weight. Should have had that queued up when I started the podcast. But he's a big, lean athlete. You know what I mean? Somebody like probably moves better even than a Matt Gonsalves, who was a sort of tight end basketball player, playing offensive tackle. And coming to Pitt and sort of bringing that athleticism. I think there's been some Brian O'Neill comparisons. I don't know if he runs quite as well as Brian did in high school, particularly before Brian added all the weight to move to offensive tackle, but he is a big athlete, particularly at his size. And when you stretch a guy out that tall and he's in that 250, 260 range, that weight is... You're going to carry it well. You know what I mean? You're going to wear it well. And the interesting thing about Bradley Mann, last fall, he played at like 220. So over the past 6-8 months, he's really committed himself, as he said, to training, to working out, to nutrition, to adding good weight, and he's got himself into that 250 range with, I think, room to add. You know what I mean? Room to grow. Now, you keep that in mind when you watch some of his senior film that he was playing at a lighter weight, some of his junior film, he's playing at a lighter weight. It's going to be really interesting to see how he looks and how he moves as a senior when he's got some of that extra weight added on. But the Pitt coaches liked his film and then saw him at a camp in person in June. They offered him, and he came for an official visit like 2 days later. Most of the national recruiting projections had Mann going to Louisville. Indiana was also one of his top finalists. I think a handful of other Power 5 schools were involved. I think Virginia Tech was involved in trying to recruit Bradley Mann. But ultimately, he picked Pitt, largely on the strength of his experience on the official visit, his relationship and connections with the coaching staff. He really seemed to get on well there. And I think it's another nice pickup for this class. I think it's another solid, even strong addition to the class. I mean, look, if you have a guy his size who can move like he can, who plays as physical as he does, and is just, I mean, you watch his film. You watch his film, and a lot of his snaps, the highlights are really when he's playing defensive end. And he's explosive off the ball. He terrorizes quarterbacks. He creates mayhem. He's a very active pass rusher. And I think coaches love to have that kind of a guy with that kind of size and his feet, the way his feet can move and sort of explosiveness and quickness playing offensive tackle. I think they love moving guys. A lot of college coaches, a lot of NFL coaches aren't going to move a defensive lineman to the offense. But a lot of college coaches will make that move because they'll take the guy who's playing D-line, who's got good size but also quick feet and can move, and they'll slide him over there. Since a lot of times you find guys who play offensive line in high school aren't exactly moving all that well. A lot of them are, but you like to find those guys who can move. So that's a handful of offensive linemen in this class. Isaiah Montgomery, the tackle, probably will play guard in college. And then Jakavian Nonar, another Florida guy. Montgomery's from Virginia Beach. Nonar's from Florida. Kind of a project guy. We've talked about him. He was a basketball player up until this past season. It was his first year playing football. You love the size. You love the athleticism. Just he's raw and short on experience, where you're going to then put it in the hands of Pitt's offensive line coach, Dave Borbely, to mold him into an effective Power 5 player. Talked to a lot of people who feel like, or a number of people who feel like Nonar, if he commits to it and really works and takes to the coaching, has sky-high potential, because of the athleticism, because of the size. But it is a project. You're not 100% guaranteed on any recruit panning out, but there are varying degrees of confidence you can have. There are varying degrees of success rates, or there are certain ingredients that you can put into the mix that give you a higher likelihood of success, and experience is certainly one of them. You'd love to have a guy like Nonar with his size, his athleticism, his ability to move, and also having been a 3-year starter. But if that was the case, and he had 3 years worth of film playing offensive tackle, he probably wouldn't be sort of under recruited like he has been. So yeah, we've talked about this before about what Pitt needs to do to get offensive linemen and some of the approaches they need to take, that they're probably not going to get those elite blue chip guys, those 5-star top offensive tackles in the country. You try and get as high caliber as you can of those prospects, but you're also going to have a few, for lack of a better term, lottery tickets. And that's what Jakevian Nonar is. Bradley Mann, I think, is less so because he's got experience playing offensive tackle. He, for a few years, he's not, Jakevian Nonar, who's just jumping into it. He'll come to Pitt with 2 years of experience playing football, which is not a lot. Mann has more experience than that, but I think also because his body is still developing, because like I say, 6'6", 250, 255, he's gonna need to add a lot of weight to that if he's gonna play on the offensive line. If he sticks at DN, yeah, you might be able to top out at 265. But if he's going to move to the offensive line, if he's going to play offensive tackle, he's going to need to be 280, 285, 290. And so there's some questions about how his body will carry that weight and how he'll be able to move as he adds that extra weight. But he's got experience. He's got a proven, sort of a resume as a player. I think he's probably got a little more of that factor in terms of, you look at the elements that will contribute to success. And so I like this pickup. I think you'd like to see them get one more offensive lineman in this class. I think when you look at the roster, and particularly if just holes that are going to develop, where in the past few years, maybe they, out of the last, say, 3 recruiting classes, 19, 20, 21, really even the last 4. You could go back to the 2018 class. 2017, they took like 5 guys. They had Carter Warren and Gabe Hoy and Carson Van Lin and Owen Drexel and Jerry Drake. They had 5 offensive linemen in that class, plus Grant Kerrigan, who came in as a tight end and has spent time playing offensive line. So they had 5 guys there. But then the next year, they only had Jake Cradle and Blake Zabovic. 2019, I think they had Liam Dick and Matt Gonsalves. And Jason Collier, who ultimately moved to the offensive line, but Liam Dick transferred. So you still end up with a net 2 in terms of offensive line additions. 2020, they get Michael Statham and Branson Taylor. This past year, 21, who they have? They have Terrence Enos, Terrence Moore. They had Kyle Fugetti from Michigan, but he decided right before it was time to move to Pitt that he wasn't going to move to Pitt, and so he's asked out of his letter of intent, trying to look to transfer to another school. And then they have Trey Anderson, the kid from Utah who graduated from high school a couple of years ago, spent 2 years on doing a mission, and now is coming back as a former tight end and a guy who is 2 years older than all the other freshmen in the class, but he's coming in as well. Again, a little bit of a project there. So you're looking at, even though they signed 4 recruits in that class, you're looking at a net addition of 3 offensive linemen. So when you go 2, 2, 2, 3, you're going to end up a little bit light on the roster. I think 1 or 2 of those classes needed to be a little bit bigger. Well, that was the 2019 class, that you needed Gonsalves and Dick and Collier all to stick. And I think even Bryce Nelms, if you recall him, he was a defensive lineman, a defensive line recruit who I think was projected to end up on the offensive line. Ultimately, that class, if you had all 4 of those guys stick, which they've lost Nelms and they lost Dick now, if you had all 4 of those guys stay in place, then your numbers would be a little more robust heading forward, but they're not. And so I think you could talk yourself into 1 more offensive lineman. We talk about Jackson Brown, a kid from California, a Pitt legacy, son of Tony Brown, an offensive lineman who played at Pitt in the 1980s. He would be a really good addition. I just don't know if they have room for it. I think in a normal year, if this wasn't a year where scholarship numbers are just completely up in the air, and you don't know how many scholarships you're going to have available for next year, for this 2022 recruiting class, if it was a normal year, I think without a doubt they would take another offensive lineman. But it's not a normal year, and you don't have that many scholarships to work with. So they've already got 12 recruits committed. Technically, I don't know. They don't really have any more scholarships other than that. They've got 12 or 13 seniors on this roster who could potentially come back 1 more year. So they've got their, I think, it's 12 super seniors. I think there's 25 total seniors, and like 12 of them are super seniors who don't count against the 85-man scholarship limit. So their departures next year is not going to have anything to do with the 2022 recruiting class and available scholarships for that group. But the other seniors, those guys, their spots will be the ones that open up to create scholarship availability for the incoming recruiting class, that class of 2022 who will be freshmen next fall. Thing is, all of those seniors could choose to come back one more year. And we're talking about, Todd Sibley. We're talking about, I ran down the whole list on Panther-Lair.com late last week. And that group, every one of those guys who chooses to come back, Kirk Christodoulou, 2017 recruits, guys who were in the 2017 class, redshirted, or guys in 2018 class who did not redshirt, like Ashaki Jacques-Louis. Any of those guys who chooses to come back is taking a spot that would otherwise go to a recruit in the 2022 class. Because those seniors this year who come back for 2022 as super seniors will count against the 85-man scholarship limit. And that takes up a spot in the recruiting class. You already have a small senior class, 12, 13 guys. In a normal year, all those spots are opening and you can count on getting 4 or 5 more through attrition. And you can end up taking 18, 19, probably 20 guys. This year, you can't even count on all 13 of those guys leaving. Some of them are going to come back. Those offensive linemen we talked about. Because it's not necessarily a bad thing if a Carter Warren wants to come back or an Owen Drexel wants to come back, assuming Drexel has a good season this year. Or a Gabe Hoy wants to come back because, we just talked about some of the offensive line numbers. Having those guys back would help you in 2022. They're going to help secure your offensive line and shore it up in 2022. But they're also going to take away a spot that would otherwise have gone maybe to an offensive line recruit, who could help shore up the position for the next 5 years as opposed to just the next 1 year. And it's tough. And the coaches don't, maybe they've had conversations with some of these super seniors or potential super seniors about who might want to come back or who might not want to come back. But I don't think I got to imagine that for the most part, they don't have definitive answers from any of them. Because who could make a definitive answer? Kenny Pickett, if you asked him last year at this time, hey, Kenny, you going to be back on Pitt's roster in 2021? He would have said no. You could ask Damari Mathis around this time or maybe a month or so earlier, May, June 2020. Hey, Damari, are you going to be on Pitt's roster in 2021? He would have said no. He didn't realize he was going to get hurt and suffer a season-ending injury. But any of these things are possible. A guy could tell you right now, no, coach, I'm not coming back. All right, this is my final year here, and then I'm going to go to the NFL. And that's all well and good. Things can change over the course of 4 months. Or, right now it's July, right? So over the course of 5-6 months, things can change. Guys can change their mind. There can be different circumstances, and a guy can end up coming back. And that could be great for your roster in 2022, but it's going to create some problems for you beyond next season. So I don't know what they do with the offensive line recruiting situation. With 12 commitments already, they've really only got a few more spots. I would imagine they'd like to get a tight end. But then again, they just signed 3 in this 2021 class. So maybe that gives them a little bit of, after they added Cole Mitchell, the late addition to the 2021 class who moved in as a freshman a week or two ago. Maybe they... maybe taking 3 guys that they feel good about, and Cole Mitchell, Gavin Bartholomew, and Jake Renda, maybe that lets them, gives them some flexibility to hold off on tight end for this year and go get a guy next year. It might even be the same situation at quarterback where they feel like, okay, Pickett's gone after this year, but we've still got Patty, Bevel, Yellen, Yarnell coming back. That's 4 scholarship quarterbacks that we feel good about to varying degrees. We can get away with not taking one this year. We'll make sure we get one in 2023, and we'll get a transfer if we have to at some point along the way. If the right guy emerges during his senior season, then maybe they change that stance. But they might have a little flexibility at tight end and quarterback to not take a recruit this year because of what their current roster looks like. I'm inclined to think they want another linebacker. in this class. I'm inclined to think they want another defensive back in this class, if not two. Because they've got a corner and a safety right now. They might want one of each to go with those guys. I have to think they want another defensive lineman. They've got one end and one tackle. But again, this is kind of what the numbers are like this year. This is where they're at with having to recruit in 2022. And almost every coaching staff across the country is having to deal with these number crunches. Unless they already know they don't want anybody back from the senior class. And so they're not even worried about it. They're just going to kick everybody out. Take a full class and everybody's happy except the guys who got booted, right? All right, so that's kind of a state of the recruiting situation after Pitt's, or state of the recruiting update after Pitt's most recent commitment. They have 12 commitments now, like I said. We'll see where they go from here. I really don't know. I think there are a few targets out there we can identify. Some guys who took visits, but even the guys who took official visits, I don't think all of them could commit right now. Like there are a few who could not. So recruiting is always a finesse game. And numbers are always moving. You can sit down at the beginning of the recruiting cycle and say, we're taking this many kids in the class. We're having this many running backs, this many receivers, this many O-line, this many this many that. And those numbers are going to change. Every single one of those numbers is going to change over time. Unless it's something like we're taking one quarterback and that's it. You probably will stick to that. But those numbers are going to change over time. Inevitably. And when you have a year like this, when things are especially up in the air, those numbers might change, I don't know, multiple times during the day. Not every day. All right, let's jump into the comments and questions. We got a lot jumping in already. A couple super chatters. We love it. RJC Man 38 was our first super chatter. He jumped in and said, I need accountability. If Pitt's total offense after 5 games is not ranked in the top 10, that's ominous. You might be right. And RJC Man, you've tweeted me about this a few times about what you want to see out of Pitt's offense in the first 5 games. And look, I'll be right there with you. If they come out and open the season with a couple of dismal offensive performances that look all too much like 2020 looked, like 2019 looked, I'm going to be pretty concerned. It might not, it won't automatically mean that they're going to be like that all season. But if we don't see anything, any clear movement forward, whether it's with the running game or the, how receivers are catching the ball or simply scoring more touchdowns, if we don't see that, kind of right off the bat, it is going to be concerning. And I think you can have some expectation or some hope that they will be more effective right off the bat. Yeah, you're at this point. You've got a 5th-year quarterback who's in his 4th year as a starter. His 3rd year working with the offensive coordinator. He's got receivers. All these guys he's worked with before. He's got tight ends he's worked with before. His offensive line lost some key guys. There's no question. Jimmy Morrissey is a huge loss. So you're going to have a big replacement there, and you're going to have to get Kenny Pickett and Owen Drexel connected. You know what I mean? Those guys are going to have to form a strong bond. But overall, you should have the personnel that the offense is better right from the jump. It shouldn't take time to ease into it. And I don't care who the opponent is, I think you should come out firing like they did against Austin Peay last year. I was willing to buy in on what they did against Austin Peay. Not because I think Austin Peay is some legitimate competition or that, or that I think it's truly a testament to how good they're going to be this year. See what they did against Austin Peay. No, I didn't put that much in it. But what I put stock in was Pat Narduzzi sort of letting it happen. Because it hasn't always happened, right? We know the other FCS games that Pitt has played under Narduzzi, and they haven't done that to other teams. But Narduzzi even came out and said it after the game that they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to come out and really lay it on somebody. Not out of disrespect for Austin Peay, but just because they wanted to show that they could do it. Show it to the fans and potentially even show it to themselves. Prove it to themselves. And, obviously that didn't carry over through the rest of the season. They had some outbursts here and there. The offense was pretty good at Florida State. Once it got settled in, offense was pretty good against Virginia Tech and was good enough against Georgia Tech. But obviously let them down against NC State, let them down against Boston College, and quite frankly, almost let them down against Syracuse and Louisville. They ended up pulling those games out, but the offense, it wasn't because the offense was great. So I'm not going to overreact to a strong performance early in the season, but I am going to expect one. And I might overreact if they don't have a strong performance early in the season. That kind of dovetails in. We have another super chatter, Michael B. I'm going to get to you next. But it sort of dovetails in. Roman jumped, started off our questions here in the live stream with a good one. He says, "Hey Chris, hypothetical for you. If you could only ask Narduzzi one question before the season, what would you ask?" Now I'm going to assume that what you mean, Roman, is if I could ask one question and get an honest answer, an honest, candid answer, what would I ask? Yeah, because I could ask any question I want, but if he's not going to be honest, it doesn't matter. But if I could get an honest answer from Pat Narduzzi, the one question I would ask is this. How are you going to improve the offense? And tied into that question is basically you're asking what was the biggest issue with the offense last year. And I don't think there was one issue. I think there were multiple issues. But I mean, that's the question, is how are you going to get this offense better? You got to score more touchdowns in the red zone. How are you going to do it? You got to cut down on the self-inflicted errors, procedure penalties, fumbles, either lost or recovered, turnovers, drop passes. How are you going to cut down on those? How are you going to establish a running game? All of those elements, and there's overlap among all of them, but all of those elements come together could come together to elevate the offense. And what they've done in the past few years in those elements has held the offense back. So that's the number one question. How are you going to improve the offense? Because if you improve the offense, you'll win a lot of games. And if you don't, it's going to look like last year or the year before or the year before. And if it looks like last year or the year before or the year before, there are going to be serious and well-deserved questions and hard questions that have to be asked. Not by me, not by the media, not by the fans, but by the coaching staff and by Pat Narduzzi and by Heather Lyke. Real, legitimate questions of what is going on here, why isn't this working, and maybe most importantly, is it ever going to work? I always hate when we oversimplify things and say, well, this one thing, if they do this, they're going to do that. But it really comes down to, if they fix the offense, they'll win a bunch of games. The defense will be good enough. I don't know if it'll be great, but it'll be good enough that if they can fix the offense and average 30 points a game, better than 30 points a game, they'll win a bunch. They'll win 9 or 10 games in the regular season and have a good shot at winning their bowl game. And they'll be competitive and potentially even win the ACC Coastal Division. If they can get that offense over the 30 points per game hump. I really believe that. Because I think their defense will be good enough, not necessarily to hold every opponent under 30, but if you're averaging 30 a game in scoring, you're going to have a few games where you fall under 30, but you're going to have a bunch where you fall above, where you score 35, you score 38. And I think this defense will be good enough that if you stake them 35 or 38 points, you'll win the game. Most of the time. 9 times out of 10. They might score 35 or 38 against Clemson and still lose. But the defense should be good enough that 10 out of 12 games this season, if you can score 35 or 38, the defense will be good enough to get you the win. With the two exceptions potentially being, Clemson or North Carolina. I really believe that. And so that's what it comes down to. This season, the outlook for Pat Narduzzi's tenure at Pitt is riding a whole lot on this season. And this season is riding a whole lot on the offense. So that would be my question. How are you fixing the offense? It's been broken. Change coordinators. It, arguably got even more broken after you change coordinators. So how are you going to fix it this year? All right, Michael B., Super Chatter, we very much appreciate you jumping in, supporting the podcast. If you want to be a Super Chatter, you can click that button down to the bottom and contribute to the podcast, contribute to the live stream. We love it. We're big fans, and we'll be sure to get to your questions. Hi, Chris. Hope you're doing well. I have a question for you. If Cam Johnson had stayed at Pitt all 4 years, do you think he still would have been a first-round pick? I actually think no. Carolina, in my opinion, gave him a lot more exposure. I mean, exposure is one thing. Exposure is good. But, Cam Johnson became, a first-round pick. Cam Johnson has become a good NBA player. Not because of exposure, but because of development. And so, that's the real question at Pitt is, would he have developed the same way? If he had stayed at Pitt and not transferred to North Carolina. And I don't know. It's too hard for me to say that he will or that he would or wouldn't. There are too many factors that would have played into it. I think you can look at Carolina and say, well, look at all the guys that they put in the league, but they're also recruiting at a very high level. They're not recruiting Cam Johnson out of high school. They're recruiting McDonald's All-Americans and 5-star blue chip players. And I think there's more development that goes into that than people usually give it credit for. But at the same time, your development process looks great if your guy's already started at a really high level. You know what I mean? If a guy comes in and potentially is already good enough to go to the NBA, but he has to go to college because of the rule, and you, quote unquote, develop him into a first-round draft pick, I'm sure you helped him. I'm sure his game improved. I'm sure he refined his game, became a more polished player during a year with Roy Williams. But he was already on that path to begin with. A guy like Cam Johnson, you do need to elevate that. Now, the credit for that goes to Carolina. When he left Pitt, he was not a first-round draft pick. When he left Pitt, he was not an NBA player. At least it's not how he looked when he was at Pitt. So you do give credit to North Carolina in that regard, but who knows, how much of that was just personal growth and development that potentially could have happened at Pitt. So I don't know. I think that's a tough question to answer. S-Max says, do you see Pitt filling the Kyle Fugetti scholarship? I think no. Not really. And maybe Cole Mitchell was it. To be honest, Cole Mitchell, the tight end, who was planning on going to the IMG Academy to be in the 2022 recruiting class, went to Pitt's camp and ended up getting offered a scholarship opportunity as a 2021 recruit who could move in and be a freshman this year. I think that's that's probably it right there. So the Cole Mitchell thing, I feel like he camped on the 13th. I would have to double check on which date he camped. It was either the 13th or what day was that? 13th or the 19th. See, that's Sunday or that following Saturday? No. Yeah, it was either the 13th or the 19th. And I want to say it might have been the 19th. Either way, he camped one of those days. And the coaches told him they wanted to offer him a scholarship, but they weren't sure if it was going to be for 2021, which would make him a freshman right now, or for 2022, which would be go to IMG Academy. We hope to get you up here in a year. The 13th was the day freshmen were supposed to report. That was the day Kyle Fugetti did not report. So you see how the timelines do overlap here. And the Pitt coach took a few days, got back in touch with him and said, hey, we do want you in this 2021 recruiting class, which probably overlaps with Fugetti saying, no, I'm not coming, and requesting his release from his letter of intent. So I think that probably does fill the Fugetti scholarship. So I don't see anybody else being added to the roster unless there's, attrition or something like that, and they end up, putting a walk-on in or something like that. Colin Towell says, how do you see the offensive line performing this year? It feels like that's the biggest question mark this season. Yeah, as I talked about all the things with the offense and how important the offense is for 2021, a big part of it comes down to the offensive line. It's every position group, though, on offense. And, it's the offensive line because they have to block better for Kenny Pickett. Not necessarily a 200-yard rushing game, but when the holes were there, Vincent Davis hit the holes. You have to take advantage of what's there. And sometimes, and this is a crazy idea, you got to make a guy miss. You block 10 guys, and you have to make number 11 miss and make a play. You have to make a play sometimes. And they just haven't done that enough really since 2018. Dig this stat, all right? 2018, Pitt had 2,000-yard rushers for the first time in school history, right? Quadri Olson and Darren Hall. You know that. It was a monster rushing performance that year. It was the only thing they could do was run the ball. That's why they fired Sean Watson and hired Mark Whipple, because he, direct a passing attack. So 2,000-yard rushers in 2018. Vincent Davis, A.J. Davis, primary ball carriers since then. Neither one of them has 1,000 yards in his career. A.J. Davis is like 970 rushing yards in his career. Vincent Davis is like 946 or something like that in his career. Olson and Hall had 1,000 each in 2018. None of the other guys on the current roster has even 1,000 in his career, having played the last 2 seasons since Olson and Hall went off like that. So the running backs have a huge part to play in this. The tight ends. Catch the ball. Be a factor. Forget catch the ball. I mean, that's sort of rudimentary. That's basic stuff. Be a factor. Impact a game at all. Because the tight ends haven't impacted a game for Pitt in years. And that's in pass catching, being a weapon in the passing game, and also blocking well. I mean, you talk about, the role of the tight end and the lack of a running game over the last couple of years. Part of it is the poor blocking from the tight end position. Wide receivers, catch the ball. And again, make a play. Some guys have to step up and make a play. And Jordan Addison did it a little bit. Taysir Mack has done it from time to time. Jacques Louis has got a few of those under his belt. I think Jalen Barden has the potential to do it. You got to do it more consistently, more frequently. Be a threat. Be a real, legitimate threat that defenses have to respect. And then the quarterback, you got to read better. You got to read the defenses better. You got to feel the pressure better. You've got to get the ball to the receivers and the tight ends. Not just a ball that hits them in the hands, but a ball that is legitimately catchable. And I shouldn't say legitimately catchable, but not everything has to be such a high degree of difficulty. And I think Kenny Pickett has something to do with that. The drops, largely, I'm going to put on the receivers and I'm going to put them on the tight ends. But the quarterback's not without some amount of culpability there. He can do a little bit better job of more catchable balls. All of it, the whole offense needs to get better. And it all works together. You know what I mean? Kenny Pickett can make better calls I just talked about Kenny Pickett with the receivers and the tight ends, how he can help those guys. And those guys can obviously help him. The tight ends can, help Kenny Pickett in the passing game, but they can also help the running game too. The offensive line can help the running backs. The running backs can do better things to help the quarterbacks or help help the offensive line by taking advantage of the holes that are there. The whole group has to not suck. Is probably the most blunt way I could put it. And that's not to say that the whole group did suck in recent years, but they have to make a point this year of not sucking. That's maybe I'm kind of into the whole brevity thing. And so if I were to, I guess Roman started us off, what would be my question to Pat Narduzzi? My one question would be, how do you fix this offense? If I could give one piece of advice to this team on how to have success this year, I would single out the offense and I would say, don't suck. And because all of you together need to figure this out, or the whole team's going to suffer for it, just like they did in 2019, just like they did in 2020. The defense is not without blame for those 2 seasons, and even 2018. We certainly saw some bad defensive performances in 2018. The defense lost the North Carolina game in 2018. The defense was pretty bad against Central Florida in 2018. Ooh, Central Florida. They hate when you call them Central Florida. If you want to make a UCF fan really mad, refer to them as Central Florida. For some reason, it bugs the ever-loving you-know-what out of them. I can't figure it out. I think it's like Pitt fans in Pittsburgh. UCF fans hate it when you refer to the team as Central Florida. I had prior to one of the 2 Central Florida games, either 2018 or 2019, I had a Central Florida writer as a guest on the podcast. And I would say, what is UCF doing this year? What do the Knights do here? How does Central Florida this, or what did Central Florida do in that game? And after we put it out, like I had people on like social media like, hey, what's your problem, man? We don't go by Central Florida. It's UCF. That's what we are. It's the weirdest. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say it's the weirdest kind of fan complaint, because we've seen fans complain about being called Pittsburgh as opposed to Pitt. But yeah, UCF, Central Florida fans are weird. There. Suck it, Central Florida fans. The defense has certainly had its rough games over the last 3 years. But on the whole, I can find a lot more games that were lost by the offense than by the defense. And so if you're going to win games this year, if you're going to win a lot of games this year, the offense has to be better than it was. All right, let's see here. We got a lot of comments and questions in here. You guys are firing away. I got to start rolling through these. Stop getting sidetracked talking about how to make Central Florida fans mad. Oop, did it again. Let's see. S. Max says it's Pitt Day on the ACC network. Just watch Pitt basketball take down Duke. Femi Odikali played big minutes down the stretch. Yeah, I think what's interesting about Pitt basketball this year is you can go back and find various moments throughout the course of the season, particularly in the second half and especially in the final sort of quarter or so, where Femi Odikali and Nike Sabandi will get you really excited about what the season could be this year. You know, I mean, I think they show flashes that you say, holy cow, if you guys can do that night in, night out, that's going to be really, really good. Now, they obviously didn't do it night in and night out last season, or else the results would have been a little bit better. And to some extent, they didn't have the opportunity. I mean, Nike Sabandi wasn't eligible for the longest time. Femi Odikali wasn't playing because Xavier Johnson was there. But you can find these moments. Like that first game was at NC State or Wake Forest, the first game after Audice Toney and Xavier Johnson transferred, where Femi Odikali was awesome. You know what I mean? Where you said, holy cow, this guy's going to be really good. Now, he didn't do that every game after those guys transferred, but he did it enough that you say, all right, there's something here. There's something you can work with. And I think you can find games like you mentioned, S-Mac, you mentioned that Duke game. I mean, you can find those games where those guys, whether it's Odikali or it's Nike Sabandi or some moments for Will Jeffress or some of those points early in the season with John Hughley, you can find points where those guys give you a lot of, optimism. Let's see here. RJC Man 38, year 7 Pat Narduzzi era needs to have strict benchmarks. I expect Pitt's offense end of the season to be in the top half of Power 5. I expect 8 wins, and I expect top-notch defense. All that happens, Pat Narduzzi keeps his job. I think they'll win 8 games. If they don't, there'll be a real problem. What those 8 wins are, and kind of if they, if it's 8 regular season wins versus 8 wins total, 7 regular season, 1 bowl game, who they beat in the regular season, who they lose to in the regular season, I think those will kind of impact it. Top-notch defense, I think it should be a pretty good defense. I think there are some pieces that need to fall into place in order for it to be a top-notch defense that we've seen at various points over the last couple of years. I don't think it's impossible for it to happen. I just need to actually see it come together. And then Pitt's offense in the top half of the Power 5, yeah, I mean, I think that should be viable, in scoring offense. And that's really what's most important, right, is the points. We're not going to talk about total offense or anything like that. But, I mean, they need to be, I think you should find yourself in the top half of Power 5. But ultimately, it's going to be about the wins. You can set benchmarks for defensive performance or offensive performance. But the reality is, you could have top half of Power 5 offense and even good defensive stats, and you still end up losing 5 games. You didn't have a good season. And conversely, you could go out and win 9 or 10 in the regular season and end up with an offense that's 40th, 45th, 50th in scoring in Power 5, or a defense that's not really all that up to snuff, but you still manage to come out with 9 regular season wins, and that's going to be a good season. It's going to help with job security. Bart Simpson says, I saw on a YouTube season prediction they said Heather made comments about going independent. Any truth to that? You know what, man? If you saw that, I did not see any comments from Heather Lyke about going independent. I don't know why Pitt would ever do that. You are in the ACC. You destroyed the Big East, exclusively for the check from the ACC, which is far bigger than any check you're ever going to get as an independent. So I don't know why you would ever do that. Anthony Tennyson, do you think with Coach Capel giving out over 60 offers for the 2022-23 classes, he will finally get his big man like John Hughley? Is that who you mean, Tony? I mean, he got a big man 2 classes ago. I know it's not a 7-footer, but I don't know if I think Pitt's ever going to get a 4-star 7-footer. I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen. I don't think they're going to even. I mean, they'll try on some guys like that, but I think the reality is they're going to build their team. They're going to build their team with. I don't want to say a different style of player, but I could see them going for more of the kind of roster where you go on the court and you could potentially have a point guard and like 4 guys who are 6'6" or taller. Your center might only be 6'8" or 6'9", like a John Hughley sized guy, and that might even be bigger than Hughley is. But you play with it because you can, you can rebound and you can get out and score. Will he get his big man? I don't know. We'll see what comes together, but we'll also see how Capel wants to go about constructing the roster. Brock Madonic, do you think losing Brandon Honorable, Malik Newton, and Kyle Fugetti hurt Pitt? It definitely is deflating with this class having a bunch of hype. I think I liked Brandon Honorable, offensive lineman from Detroit, who apparently had some great issues, but he's ending up at like Western Michigan, I think. Malik Newton, outstanding running back. He was one of the guys I was really excited about in this class. I thought Malik Newton was going to be really good in this recruiting class coming out of Virginia, a very productive running back, a guy who I thought could come in and really play a lot as a freshman and contribute. But he enrolled in January. He was medically disqualified. And then Kyle Fugetti, like we talked about, decided he didn't want to enroll when it came time to enroll in June. I like all 3 of those players to varying degrees. I think they were all, had a potential to contribute and make an impact over the course of their careers at Pitt. But I think a lot of the hype for the class was centered more around Nakai Johnson, Elliott Donald, to some extent Dorian Ford, Naquan Brown. That's where a lot of the hype for the class, I think, came from. More so than Fugetti, Newton, Brandon Honorable. I think the other offensive linemen that they did sign, Terrence Enos and Terrence Moore, I think those guys are good. But, a lot of the hype for the class was centered around getting those big-time local defensive line prospects. And then adding Naquan Brown late in the process is another 4-star. I think that's where the hype was, and I think I don't think that is dissipated at all. Let's see here. Royce Beacom says Pitt almost never threw with play action. According to Pro Football Focus, only 13%, third from last in the Power 5. Why? Without play action, this means shorter passes and more difficult passes in the middle, limits Kenny Pickett's development also. If you don't run the ball very well, if the run is not a threat, I don't know if play action can be all that effective, and all you're really doing is just sort of slowing down the quarterback's opportunity to start making his reads, right? I think when you run play action, you do take away sort of a split second of quarterback read, of the quarterback scanning the field and seeing what the defense is doing right after the snap. But you're willing to sacrifice that because it should open things up when the defense has to respond to the run. But nobody was threatened by Pitt's running game last year or in 2019. And because of that, I don't think play action was all that effective. I think if you have to have the running game for play action to be effective, in my opinion. And I think most coaches would probably agree about that. You aren't going to trick anybody with a play fake if the play that you're faking is not really one they're afraid of. So establish the running game. If they could get a good running game going, I bet you see that percentage of play action plays go up a bit. Let's see here. Josh Newark says 2020 was the first time in 4 years that Pitt didn't have Penn State in the second week. I think Pat Narduzzi played the don't show the FCS school much because he didn't want James Franklin to show him too much. I hope, you might be right. I hope Pat Narduzzi got over his whole thing of hiding things in the FCS game. I know you're not going to show your whole playbook, but go out and win comfortably in your season opener. Go out and beat the pants off somebody. because there's nothing I don't think you gain that much by holding anything back. Go out and win the game by a lot. Let's see here. Kevin Plaucha. Sup, Chris? A little late, but at least I made it. Kevin, biggest fan of the podcast. We love you, man. Glad you could make it in for the live stream tonight. RJC Man 38 jumping in again. How much faith do you have the coaches playing the best players last year? Offensive line opened my eyes to how bad the coaches did at fielding an O-line. I think the biggest question mark as far as getting the right players on the field with the offensive line is Matt Gonsalves. When you roll out, you go with Carter Warren and Gabe Hoy, and then you get to a game where Matt Gonsalves plays, and he's pretty good. And which he had to do in the Virginia Tech game and the Clemson game when Pitt had some COVID protocol issues. And Gonsalves was pretty good. And then you hear a lot of hype about how good Gonsalves has been for the last 2 years, playing on the practice squad or working on the second team in practice. You really start to wonder why he wasn't getting more playing time. And this year it's going to be a position battle with Hoy and Warren and Gonsalves battling out for the 2 tackle spots. And I think Gonsalves has to be one of those 2 starters. He looks like the best tackle on the team. I think he has to be one of those 2 guys. And I'll say this, all right? I'm not one that says we should just defer to the coaches on everything. Yeah, in any sport, or for any team, whether we're talking about the Steelers or the Pirates, or the Penguins or Pitt basketball, Pitt football. I hesitate to get too harsh on personnel questions, right? Because we sit there, you and I, we watch the games, right? We watch 12 Pitt games, 13 Pitt games in a year. We watch 16, however many Steeler games in a year. We watch 162 Pirates games. We watch 82 Penguins games, whatever it is. And we feel like we really know what's going on. We feel like we really know who stands out. We feel like we really know who the best players are. But the reality is, and this is not just saying we should automatically defer to the coaches, because they're certainly not infallible. But the reality is, these coaches are around these players every day. They have them in practice for a couple of hours every day. They have them in film room for a couple hours every day. And the thing I know about coaches, all right, there is no... The one sort of undeniable truth I have learned about coaches over the years is that they are not actively trying to lose. They're going to play the players that they feel give them the best chance to win, rightly or wrongly. And they could misread a situation. They could be playing the wrong guys, but they're going to play the guys that give them the best chance to win based on what they see in practice and what they experience in the film room. And I can't fault that. You know what I mean? Like, they have a lot more information to go on than we do. We watch one game and see how a guy performs, but if you were a coach, maybe you go through the whole week of practice and a guy is just terrible. He's terrible in practice. He's lazy in the film room. He doesn't seem to understand the concepts or anything like that. And then you get to the game, and for some reason you have to put him in, and he plays really well. Are you really going to sit him down? Are you really going to sit down the guy who earned your confidence in practice and earned your confidence in the film room, in the team meetings, in favor of the guy who seems like a liability? You're going to play the odds. You're going to go with the guy who gives you the most confidence, you feel gives you the best chance to win the games. And so I might look at a situation and say, hey man, look at what Todd Sibley does when he gets the ball. When he's on the field, look at the yards per carry, look at the plays he's made. Why is he, topping out at 4 carries a game or something like that and only out of the Wildcat? I can sit there and say that because that's what I see in the games. But the coaches have him in practice. The coaches have him in meeting rooms and film. And it's not like a hugely negative thing, but if your experience in practice, if your time watching these guys in practice is this guy's not making any plays, this guy's not getting it done, then you're not going to you're not going to play the guy that hasn't shown that he can help you win. Even if you get into a game and he gets his opportunity and he does it, if he comes back out the next week and has another bad week of practice or something, you're not going to go with him. So that's why I have a hard time with getting on guys about personnel decisions, simply because they have a whole lot more information than I do. And that doesn't necessarily mean they always interpret that information correctly or they make the right decisions with that information, but they do have a lot more information than I do. And so I kind of have to defer to them to some extent, at least on personnel decisions. All right, S-Max says, who leads Pitt in sacks this season? Let's go with Habakkuk Baldonado. Maybe you want to throw in like a Cam Bright or Servassier Dennis, one of the linebackers. I'm going to go with Habakkuk Baldonado. I think defensive end. I think he's going to get a lot of playing time this year, and I think he'll have a really big season. I think John Morgan's in line for a big year too. I think he'll play really well. All right, final one. RJC Man 38, one of our super chatters, says, can you name 3 freshmen that will make an immediate impact this year? So this is an interesting question because I'm not sure. I don't think there's a Jordan Addison, at least on offense, this year. Partially the caliber of recruits that they're bringing in, and I think they're bringing in some good players. But they've got a bunch of receivers with experience and talent. They've got Addison, they've got Taysier Mack, they've got Shockey Jacques-Louis, they've got Jared Wayne, they've got Jalen Barden. Just with those, however many I just named, 5 guys, you've got a pretty strong receiving core, I think. Pretty strong receiving core. And then at running back, they're bringing in Rodney Hammond as a freshman, but you've got Vincent Davis and A.J. Davis back, and you've got Izzy Abanikanda, who is, maybe the most promising back on the roster, a guy who could really break out and have a big season. Tight end is the same way. You've got Lucas Krull. Lucas Krull should be the man at tight end this year. Even though I think, Gavin Bartholomew will get on the field and play. Actually, maybe I'll make him one of the 3 freshmen who I think will make an immediate impact, but he's not going to be the number 1 tight end. On the flip side, on the defensive side of the ball, here again, you've got a lot of depth and talent and experience returning. So there's not going to be a lot of openings and opportunities for a young player to get out there, except Khalil Anderson. Khalil Anderson is going to be a stud cornerback. I think Khalil Anderson is he's just going to be really good. I would even go so far as to say he's going to be sort of the Jordan Addison of this year. The only problem there is that Pitt's got a bunch of upperclassmen at cornerback. They've got Damari Mathis and Marquez Williams and A.J. Woods and Rashad Battle. They've got guys who have played a lot. So he's going to have to fight through some competition, but I think he's good enough to get out on the field and play a lot. I don't know if he would be a starter or not, but you've seen them rotate corners over the years, and he's going to be out there a lot. He's going to play a whole lot. All right, final question, Scott Eisenberg. In your humble opinion, will we finally get through a football season without thinking the ACC refs are worst in college football? No, Scott, you will not. They will be rough because they always are. So I think that'll be a good spot for us to wrap up. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate joining us here on the live stream. Of course, make sure if you're listening to the podcast through the week, you can come back and hang out here on a Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. every Tuesday night. We get together for the Panther-Lair Show. And, of course, if you miss it, you listen to it later on the week on the audio side of things. And, of course, there's always the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And you can find message boards where these conversations we're having right here, you can have all day, every day with other Pitt fans. So if you want to talk about Pitt sports, it's the place to go. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Don't forget, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., the Panthers Insider Show on Sports Radio 93.7 The Fan. Another hour of Pitt sports talk, this time on the radio. So you're driving around, you've already listened to the Panther-Lair Show podcast, you can tune into the radio show, Panthers Insider Show, right there on 93.7 The Fan, 8 a.m., Saturday morning. Thanks again to everybody for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next Tuesday night at 8:30 for the Panther-Lair Show right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.